a senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 343. What's wrong with a little feminist foreign aid? Oh, just with feminist foreign aid, right? What's wrong with that? I get asked that question. So the title of the show is because we've been getting some pushback for objecting to feminist foreign programs being funded by the U.S. government at the expense of U.S. taxpayers. And the first pushback we had was, where's the feminism? And, of course, the first set of things that we looked at, the search directly used the term feminism. So the policies all had, or feminist, so the policies all had feminist in the title, right? The second search I did was gender, and there's a bunch of gender-based this and gender-based that. So one of the things we explained on the last Ragening was that when you see gender-based in a policy, it's not that they look at it through the lens of here's how women are affected versus here's how men are affected and here's what their special needs are in each case. Feminists will like you to believe that, but usually the real process they're doing is eliminating the consideration of here's how men are affected on the idea that women are most affected, or that the effect on women is more important in some way, and therefore we can throw men under the bus to solve the problems that women are facing, or that feminists say women are facing. And an example of that is the term gender-based violence. Right? We know from statistics that have been gathered through large studies. One study actually had 18,000 couples, 18,000 relationships looked at. 11,000 couples, 18,000 relationships. And this study found that in terms of one-way domestic violence, 70% of it was female perpetrated. And in terms of two-way domestic violence, that was associated with more frequent perpetration by women than by men. And the significance of the word frequent means that the perpetration is happening more often with women than it is with men, which means that sometimes that perpetration in those two-way domestic violence relationships is female only. Whereas the term one-way domestic violence refers to relationships where all of the instances are one way, not just sometimes. And yet they call it gender-based violence and refer to it as a patriarchal sort of conspiracy. They don't use the word conspiracy, but a pattern of patriarchal practices, I guess you could say, intended to keep women down. And that the men use domestic violence as a means of dominating, controlling women. Even though the majority of it, based on these statistics, is female perpetrated or female initiated. Right? So, gender-based, in that instance, is clearly used to eclipse the causes of this problem that trace back to female behavior. Blame men and deny men the same treatment when they are victims. So you really do have to understand how feminists do things and what their game is, right? In order to get why there is a problem with funding funding feminist activism around the world, funding feminist initiatives, and having a feminist outlet or a feminist organization be the arm of the government. It's already scary when somebody shows up and says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? That shouldn't be the scariest words you hear. But it often is, especially if it comes from, the IRS or Child Protective Services. If you're a farmer and it's the EPA that shows up, right? Or a rancher and the EPA shows up, because they're probably going to find some obscure bug on your property and then tell you that you can't use your land. So it's definitely a scary set of words to begin with.
Or that you have to kill all your chickens.
Yeah, or that you have to kill all your chickens. Or when the agent that shows up in the name of feminism, though, that's where it gets weird, right? So this image, there's a purpose for this image, and we'll get into this. I'm gonna start getting into the things that I looked up. We are still on USA Spending. We are still looking at the variety of ways that the U.S. government is funding feminist activities in other countries that on the surface there's a lot of things that look good if you are uninformed, but then when you start digging a little deeper you find programs that are a little bit scary. So today we're going to look at something called EngenderHealth Incorporated, right? Known by 8 other names because they always do this. So it's got all these in the funding system. It's got all these. Let's see. EngenderHealth Incorporated is several of them. Just EngenderHealth, EngenderHealth/Acquire, EngenderHealth International. Like those are the different names that it has used over the years in this system. And there's been different types of funding that it has received over the years in this system to the tune of 14 transactions totaling $36.6 million. So I thought that was pretty interesting and this was pretty significant. So we started looking into these transactions.
It's much like people are already trying to redefine DEI as a bunch of other 3-letter agencies. Like DIB is one of them. I forget what it even stands for.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you try and defeat
belonging. The B is belonging.
Belonging, yeah. They'll try to replace it with a different 3-letter agency and be like, no, this has nothing to do with that thing. And they're going to keep doing that. If we ever do defeat feminism, folks, don't rest on your laurels. Don't act like we have defeated feminism, because they'll just redefine it as something else. They were like, this isn't feminism anymore. This is gender equity. I guess they already did that. I guess they've already done that a bunch of fucking times. Because this is how this religion works. They just redefine themselves as a whole bunch of other things, as though we won't notice.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is why I black pill, folks. Because whenever you white pill over the idea that you've defeated this cult of Cthulhu, they'll just recreate the same cult of Cthulhu with a different name. And this is why you can never white pill, because Cthulhu will always redefine itself. That's how determined it is to kill you all, and they will kill you all, because they do it with language. They do it by controlling your language and then redefining their own language, and that's how they got this far. Because they're able to manipulate the way you see things, the way you hear things, the way you understand things, and they'll keep getting away with it until people are educated enough to be able to figure out that that it's even possible to control people using language, because they don't realize that. They think, well, I have the language in question, and as long as I've been told what I need to call things, I know what everything is. No, you don't. That's what's so complicated. This is why it's so difficult to get it through, not just to half-wits, but to mid-wits, because half-wits and mid-wits both have the same problem. Well, if this is called this thing, then that's what this thing is. And so you can't argue with me, because this is what this thing is called. And it's so difficult to get through to people who can't think beyond the scope of, well, this thing is called this thing, therefore this thing is what it is. And it's always going to be an uphill battle, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other things that happen with feminism. So they'll take an initiative that is benevolent or helpful, and they'll add something to it that is neither of those things. Let me see if I think I've got a couple items that I didn't open before the show that show this. And this is again, these are all USA spending initiatives here. So let me see if this is opening. Yeah, it is. There's one, and I think when I copy pasted these, it copy pasted the same one twice instead of giving me the both of them. That's so annoying. I wonder why it does that. But this one is enough, I think, for you to see what this is a frequent problem that I run into. And this is WITS Health Consortium got 33.1 million, and you look at the purpose, and this is in Africa, by the way. School-based HIV and gender-based violence prevention, right? So you know that teenagers screw around if they get the opportunity, especially if you put them in circumstances where they're unsupervised by adults. And so if kids are running around on their own, going back and forth to school and stuff like that, there gets to be a higher risk just because they're on their own. They're not with their parents necessarily, and they're not with their teachers the whole time either. It's fair to have something like an HIV prevention program that is charitably funded, not necessarily one that is funded by taxpayer dollars without asking the taxpayers to at least approve the idea. But that would be a noble goal. But then they throw in also gender-based violence prevention, which the label tells you treats the subject as a patriarchal form of oppression against women in that area. So they're exporting the feminist Duluth model into African schools along with this program. They just sort of shoehorn that in with the noble cause of programs designed to prevent HIV. And of course, we also know that in Africa, feminists are promoting the idea that cutting some of the skin off of your dick protects you from infection. Because putting a hole in the biggest organ in your immune system helps your immune system. Totally. Very great idea. And so we look at this. At first, you think, oh, I don't want to get rid of this. There's other programs like that they've done this with, where it's pediatric AIDS treatment and stuff like that. They'll have the same thing. Oh yeah, we're gonna assist children in foreign countries that have been infected with HIV, but we're not going to address the pedophilia problem in this country. We're going to just circumcise the children. And it's that we can harvest skin and sell it if we give it this nice label thing that feminism does that makes it nefarious. It's not nefarious to try to help people in horrible situations. It's nefarious to pretend to try to help people in horrible situations so that you can exploit them for something that you can sell, whether it's their skin or these ideas that actually hinder the ability to prevent the problem that you've said you've gone there to solve. So EngenderHealth. When I looked at this, when I started looking into this, like the top few things here were those benevolent type of programs. Like one of them was providing women with reproductive health in countries where it's rare, it's not available. But they didn't have a similar program for men. So the gendered and engendered is, we only do this for women, we don't do this for men, right? And of course, when they do, a large part of what they do isn't necessarily benevolent to men. So while this organization does some noble and benevolent things, like treating women who have been severely harmed by circumcision practices in other countries, they're promoting those types of circumcision practices against boys, and they're also promoting some other interesting things. So when I started looking farther down, right, one of the things that was funded, and this wasn't a small, tiny little grant. It wasn't the biggest one. Let me see if I can find the award amount on here. And the weird thing is they put a minus in front of it, but the agency didn't pay that money back. So we're talking $372,428 for a new leader with associate cooperative agreement, meaning they hired somebody, for the Respond program. And it doesn't really say anything else about it, right? And I looked into it, and the location of practice is in the United States. So I'm like, what the fuck is the Respond program? And the second thing that I looked up that mentioned it, responding to the needs for family planning through expanded contraceptive choices. And program survey, they obviously didn't finish typing it in or posting it, but it's service. And again, we're looking at quite a bit here. This is $1,660,717. So I'm like, what is this Respond program? Well, I Googled it, and I didn't find Respond program. I found Respond project. The initial page that I went to for that on this website didn't actually say anything. It just gave me the ability to sign up to receive notifications about what they were doing, which I did. But I had to search on their site to get to articles about it. This one's older, so this isn't a new thing. They've been doing this for quite some time. It's existed for years. This article is from 2013. EngenderHealth's Respond project leads effort to measure family planning progress. EngenderHealth's Respond project, blah, 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 blah. So it's posted twice. And it has this article explaining what they're doing, right? And here's where you learn. This has been going on since 2000, where they've been doing research in foreign countries on family planning. And they have articles here, new developments in the calculation and use of couple years of protection, which basically the idea is, all right, you study a couple of years of this use of family planning. What was the result? Did anybody get pregnant? Did anybody not get pregnant? And it wasn't on this page, but here's where you sign up, you subscribe. So I subscribed. We'll see if I get anything from them. But then I also found this page on the research findings. And of course, we get into gender-based violence. Related research efforts related to gender have included multiple studies and evaluations focused on assessing the effectiveness of programs designed to prevent gender-based violence in HIV and AIDS, as well as promoting male involvement in GBV and HIV services, and SRHR, which I believe is sexual reproductive health responses, but I don't remember if that's what the last R is. But SRH is sexual and reproductive health. More broadly, in addition to many operational research studies, we have implemented several outcome evaluations related to our award-winning Men as Partners approach. Right? So that was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was way down here at the bottom. Down but not out. Vasectomy is faring poorly almost everywhere. We can do better to make it a true method option. This is from 2023, right? And there's no link for this one. So I thought, I'm going to search it, but I'm not going to find it because obviously there's no link to it. It's probably behind a paywall. That's why they didn't link to it, right? No. That is not right. So let me find it. Here we go. It's actually on the NIH, National Institutes for Health website. And I had to scroll down a bit to find out, but it's in this article. We seek to deepen the international FP communities. That's birth control, but I can't remember the way. Family planning. Family planning communities focus on vasectomy, underscoring its tenuous situation. We highlight trends in vasectomy by comparing current vasectomy prevalence levels to those of approximately a decade earlier in 95 countries. And 84 of them low to middle income countries. So let's translate that. We want to know why we're having so much trouble sterilizing people in low income countries. Specifically men. Right? And just to make it clear, we're going to go back up here to the top. Their findings and their statement at the beginning. Contraceptive use worldwide increased in the past 20 years, but the number of vasectomy users fell by 27 million, a 61% decline. So they talk about vasectomy. They recognize that. Let's see if I can find it here. They had a statement in here that it's permanent and should only be used by individuals who don't ever want to have kids. So they recognized that it was not something for everybody. There we go. Vasectomy use, let's see. Yeah, here it is. Vasectomy and tubectomy are suitable only for people intending to limit further births. Right? They know that you shouldn't get a vasectomy if you want to have children later on, because it is permanent. Reversing it is not guaranteed. People talk about it like, oh, it's reversible. Sometimes. And every time they try it, it's a maybe, not a guarantee. Right? So their conclusions here is that it's surprisingly low globally and declining. That use remains negligible. That their assumption is that it's not available. Right? That what they want is to harness mass and social media to increase accurate knowledge and normalize vasectomy as a method and service in order to increase the demand. Right. So they're actively promoting sterilization of people, permanent sterilization of men specifically, in third world countries.
This is always what they resort to. Like as I was saying on Tuesday, we fix the world's problems by restricting men's ability to do anything, and people are trying to fix world overpopulation by restricting men's ability to reproduce all over the world, including Asia and Africa, and including Europe and North America, because even though the population is declining in those areas, particularly Europe, particularly in my own country, this might be also why extreme measures have been taken to reduce the population in those countries. Mm-hmm. But as long as you're not restricting women's drive or desire to reproduce, this isn't going to mean shit. And I'm not saying you should sterilize women, but as long as you're only focusing on the men. I mean, for almost all of human history, and when I say almost all of human history, I mean the entire history of humanity, going right back to the Stone Age and the Pleistocene and all these things. Even back in those Stone Age days, 80% of women were reproducing and only 40% of men were reproducing, or whatever it is. As much as we are a pair mating species, certainly compared with other great apes, we do have this we have this unique ability for men and women to pair up, rather than do this tournament mating thing where one male has the biggest, strongest male in the tribe has the majority of the women at his disposal. Like, humans are one of the only great ape species that's been able to be like, no, let's go beyond that. I mean, not intellectually, but evolutionarily, they've been able to do this. And people think they're going to fix this by curtailing men's ability to reproduce. But I mean, by any measure, a species' ability to reproduce is bottlenecked by women's desire to reproduce. You really could reduce the male population to 10% of everything, and it wouldn't curtail population growth at all. I mean, we see this sort of thing in the Middle East and its neighbors, where they have this polygonal approach to reproduction. And that's it, you know, it's not going to help, even if you believe that overpopulation is a problem, which to some extent it is in a lot of Asian countries and a lot of African countries, even though they're still pushing it in European countries where it's not a problem. It's not going to work. As you could reduce the male population to 10%, but as long as women are still have this desire to fuck 1,000 men in 12 hours, if you see what I mean, and they very much do have this, it's emerged quite recently. Like women do in fact have the desire to fuck as many men as possible. It's only thanks to the traditions that we have developed intellectually over the years that that women shouldn't do that. That we've been able to develop the population, not in terms of quantity but quality, like producing as many offspring as possible is not necessarily the way to develop a species that that maximizes resource seeking possibilities.
Well, for one thing, it creates inbreeding. That too,
yes. That's an inherent danger of polygyny, which is polygamy, wherein every man, well, the breeding population of men has multiple women at their disposal. The idea that every woman has multiple men at the reproductive disposal has never worked out for any species, as far as anyone knows. It's kind of the opposite of what works. I mean, polyandry. I think that's the opposite of that. It only exists in recent memory, and there's not much historical accounting of how much that works, because presumably whenever it's attempted, it results in the complete destruction of a society. And yeah, I think pair bonding is the only way this can possibly work. Pair bonding is what made us an ape species that took over the world, because we're the only ape species that was able to discover pair bonding evolutionarily as well as culturally. So yeah, if you want to save the species, whether you want to save it by reproducing a lot or you want to save it by reproducing less, the answer is pair bonding, because that's what got us this far. The pursuit of pair bonding, the idea of one woman and one man staying together for as long as they can and reproducing as much as they can, or just not reproducing. Like either of those options are possible when pair bonding is a thing. And yeah, as long as we're preaching to the choir, I know, but as long as we're restricting men's options and expanding women's options, it's not going to work. Either way, it's extinction. It's Cthulhu. It's what's going to happen.
Yeah, we're ending up in a situation where we are encouraging more and more unhealthy sexual practices, and as a result, we end up with more and more unhealthy family situations and more unhealthy genetic situations. The result of sterilizing large swatches of men in third world countries is more than one thing, right? So here's where we get to put on our tinfoil hats. I've talked about this a little bit before, but in all over the world, really, in every country, there's always been that phenomenon that right now is labeled incels, right? Involuntarily celibate men. And as you know, I've had conversations with incels about their circumstances and like the circumstances of women who claim to be incels, and honestly, with women it's pretty much voluntary in that they're just refusing to settle, right? But the fact is, this is not a new phenomenon. There have always been within human cultures, there have always been a number of men whose prospects for finding a partner and making a family are slim to none, and Slim just left town. And that's just been a thing, right? The history of government involvement with incels has been one of exploitation. They are the first people who get drafted. They are the first people who get conscripted, right, in wartime. They're the first people who get thrown under the bus in a disaster. They're the first people who get sent out to deal with whatever big scary thing that might kill everybody if somebody doesn't deal with it has to be handled, because they're considered the most disposable, because they're not going to reproduce. And we see that happening today in the world in various nations where the United States has manipulated national issues into civil wars and wars between countries and so on, or is trying to start war with the nation or whatever. And of course, there's the hope that the current administration is going to put the kibosh to all that, at least for now. But that's been a pattern for centuries. And it hasn't just been a U.S. pattern, it's been every place. So it's not a thing that you're going to get rid of by, thinking that we have a new administration and everything's all better now. There will always be conflicts between nations. There will always be conflicts between political factions, and there will always be circumstances that the human race decides that men need to be thrown at this problem, and if they die, well, at least their sacrifice saved the greater population, so it was for the greater good. And yeah, obviously that's not always the truth, and it's not always an effective way of dealing with things, and it's not the best way of dealing with things. But the sterilization, the conned, the coerced, or the forced, in some cases, sterilization of men in third world countries is a facilitation of this exploitation. Right? These men now have no reason to be preserved by their communities. They can't reproduce. They can't be dedicated to a home and a family. So, if they haven't already had kids before being sterilized, well, time to chuck them into the meat grinder. And that's basically what I'm seeing here. This is a feminist-run organization, or at least a feminist-influenced organization. It looks like to me a feminist-run organization, though, that hiding behind some important work, like repairing damage done by female circumcision in third world countries, hiding behind that is this treatment of men as disposable potential cannon fodder, and as the problem, right? So that's one of the reasons why I'm looking at this. Like, obviously, the first thing is men should not be conned into doing this. A guy should really be sure what he wants before he makes that decision. And this organization appears to have done absolutely nothing for a less irreversible, actually much more reversible means of long-term male birth control. Right? In India, it's being used. It's called Risug in India. It's about to become available in the United States next year. It'll be sold under Plan A. Its medical name is Vasectomy. The Parsonage Foundation has been working on it for years, and it is a polymer compound that is it's injected into the vas deferens, and what it does is basically shred the semen on the way out. So the little swimmers cannot make babies. Like, you don't keep them in your body like with a vasectomy. And there are reasons why that can be a problem. Let's see, that's what I already showed. Right? It doesn't cause these problems. It doesn't cause the possibility of blood clots, bleeding or blood clots, because you're not cutting, you're just injecting. Doesn't cause blood in semen, bruising, infection. You may have, like with an injection, you're going to have some pain or discomfort, obviously, in the moment, but you don't have this retention of semen that can lead to other complications, chronic pain, fluid buildup, granuloma, which you get these little cysts from like sperm finding their way into places and your body reacting sort of like a oyster would react to a grain of sand, or a fluid sac, causing swelling in the scrotum. And of course, now the one thing that it doesn't do, just like vasectomy, it doesn't protect from STIs. So, in comparison to vasectomy, these risks are not as high, not likely. And then you also have the fact that you can reverse it, and you can, after 10 years you would have to get it done again, but you could just let it reverse itself if you want to. So an 18-year-old considering attending university and starting a career and everything, who maybe doesn't want to father children for 6 or 7 years, could get this done, and then when he's ready to say, okay, now my wife and I are ready to have children, and they're both in agreement and they want to start their family, then they can go in and have the second injection that reverses it, and within a few months they're ready to create a baby. And it creates a situation where the man has total control over his reproductive outcomes. This is something that women can't sabotage, right? If you're relying on condoms, there have been multiple stories come out where women have used semen from inside a condom to inseminate themselves, and it somehow worked. And then the man owed child support, or he was forced to get married. And the idea of doing something to the semen inside the condom, that's an important thing to consider, right? Destroy it with alcohol or bleach or something like that. But you don't have to do that if what's coming out isn't capable of fertilizing an egg. So that's the first thing I noticed, was this program on family planning is not only unnecessarily sterilizing men, but guys, stop suggesting the hot sauce thing. Hot sauce does not kill sperm.
No.
Right? And getting
no, but
it doesn't.
It can negatively affect any woman who tries to sperm jack.
Yeah,
so you'll end up with a funny story, but
yeah, you'll end up with a funny story and 18 years of child support.
Yeah.
So, like, don't do the hot
And
sauce
if not,
thing.
and if not, I mean, it would not surprise me if some judge would take that as, some kind of abuse or towards
assault,
the woman.
sexual assault of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there's
Well,
actually a really simple way to just rinse it out.
Yeah.
And we're coming up with all these elaborate ways of stopping women from sperm jacking men. And we could bypass all of this shit by just giving men a safe and reliable birth control method. And the only reason any of this shit even exists, even in theory, even if it is in theory, is to give men a reliable unilateral form of birth control.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't existed for the entirety of human history. It's been held back for decades now, and it will be continued to be held back because we left a bunch of fucking feminists in charge of our government and indeed our scientific institutions. You can even call them that.
So that's the first thing that I got out of this was the there it is. Oh, no, there it is. Was the family planning thing and the fact that their idea of family planning is essentially sterilizing men in third world countries permanently. So you're not exactly planning a family if you make it so that you cannot reproduce. Second thing, let's go back to.
It has to be said. There's a certain stereotype that men want to sire as many children as possible, as we covered with Elon Musk and Ashley Sinclair's story this last Tuesday, and this aligns with this stereotype that men don't really care if they sire as many children as possible. They can just run away. It's not like the government's going to come after them and make them pay for 18 years. No, a lot of men, most men want to have sex, with as many women as possible. It's unfortunate, but it's sort of evolutionarily driven. It's unfortunate. But most of those men, if they had the option of shagging as many women as possible without causing any pregnancies, hell yes, they would take that option. Especially young men, but any man, any given man, if you gave them the option of if you can shag all the women in the world and impregnate none of them, the vast majority of them will be like, oh hell yes, please, for the love of God, let me do that.
Yeah.
I love women. I want to shag all the women in the world, but I don't want to sire any children, especially because the government will make me pay for them if I do.
Yep.
So if you give them that option, they'll be like, hell yes. But we don't have that option. None of us have that option. So we're just led to we're still we're still held back by these desires, because we can't do it without responsibilities resulting from it. Women have that; they can shag all the men they want without the consequences. There's a 99%. They could always find some kind of birth control that can give them a 99% chance of not having to raise a children because of it, and that's why women are shagging 1,000 men in 12 days. Theoretically, I still choose to believe that's not happening. But if men have had that option, then they would. They could indulge their desire to hypergamously shag all the women in the world, and they wouldn't have to bear the responsibility of children. Or it's not even the responsibility of it. If men had what women have, the option of shagging 1,000 people in 12 hours and not have to pay for anything, for any spawn that drops out of it as a result, then they would do it. And believe it or not, that might make the world a better place. You can't convince men not to shag as many women as they can. That's sort of an evolutionary thing. But you can give them the option of being able to do that without the consequences of having to pay for children. And that might sound degenerate to you, but this is an option that women have had for decades now, the ability to shag as many men as possible and only bear the children of the most genetically desirable ones. And that seems to have been what has caused a great deal of our problems over the years. And it would just be nice if men had that same reproductive freedom that women have enjoyed for all these decades.
The biggest thing is the imbalance has been that if a man conceives a child with a woman without her consent to conceive a child, in a lot of countries that's a crime. And without her consent implies that she expected him to use some kind of birth control and communicated that expectation, and he claimed he was and then didn't. Basically stealthing and things like that. In a lot of countries, it's illegal for a man to remove a condom during sex or to refuse to wear a condom and still have sex, even if the woman consents to sex after he has said, no, I won't wear a condom. And she goes, all right, we'll do it anyway. Right? That's considered rape in some countries. But in no country is it considered rape for a woman to say, oh yes, I am on the pill, I will not get pregnant, and then it turns out to be a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or she's on the pill, but she takes it at 7 o'clock in the morning one day and 7 o'clock in the evening the next day, and maybe skips a day by accident, and then takes 2 pills the next day thinking it'll fix the problem, and so on. And lo and behold, she gets pregnant because she has fucked up the pattern of taking that pill, and it is not consistent in her system. And, or she's made the mistake of thinking that the ones that you take during the week that you're allowing your period to happen are still protecting her from pregnancy. They're not. But yeah, that's not a crime. So giving men an ability to unilaterally prevent their body's produced cells that are part of their body from being used against their will to create a pregnancy that will result in a child that they are not allowed to raise but have to fund. Like, that's a great tool for men to have, to be able to say, nope, I'm not going to allow that to happen. And when it becomes available, men should use it. Every man that can, and this is, it's probably going to be an investment. It's probably going to, early adopters of all forms of technology, including medical technology, pay a lot more than future adopters after it becomes more widespread. But it's definitely going to be a worthwhile investment. It's a lot cheaper to spend, something like $1,000 up front one time than it is to pay $1,000 a month in child support for 18 years.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot to talk about there. But I also want to get into what else this organization is doing. And like I said, these people will hide all sorts of ill intent behind good work. So, again, yes, I'm aware that they do help women acquire health services. And some of those health services deal with problems that are particularly egregious, abuses of women, and they're resolving things that resulted from those abuses. Right? I understand that, and if that was all they did, we wouldn't be talking about them, because there would be nothing to complain about, right? This, on the other hand, this is something that they've started years ago, before this acronym was used for a different purpose, actually, if I understand correctly, because I never heard it till, I want to say the first time I heard it would have been in 2013 or 2014. So they say, EngenderHealth established its Men as Partners program, MAP, back in 1996. I did not hear the term MAP used to describe pedophiles back in 1996. And what they're talking about here is domestic violence. And they believe, again, remember, they believe that domestic violence is a patriarchal pattern of behavior that is used by the male population to subdue and control the female population as part of its patriarchal oppression of women. So it's not just a matter of, I guess I can't eliminate that cutoff, damn it. It's not just a matter of this happening between couples, and it's an individual problem between the individuals in the couple that have dysfunctional behaviors based on maybe things they've learned wrong in their life, or other issues that they may have, mental health issues and things like that, including substance abuse. Nope, it's the patriarchy trying to dominate and suppress and oppress women. So the Men as Partners program, let me scroll this up. Through its groundbreaking work, this program works with men to play constructive roles in promoting gender equity. So there we have that equity term again, and health in their families and communities. EngenderHealth's Do No Harm framework, they mean to women, obviously, because if they're denying men the same assistance that women would get, then they're doing harm. Recognizes that interventions which challenge existing unequal gender power distribution can also run a potential risk of unintended harm and backlash on project participants, especially women, girls, and vulnerable groups and project teams. We intentionally contextualize our Do No Harm framework for all interventions, especially the ones that involve male engagement to challenge and change gender power dynamics. So what do they mean when they say challenge and change gender power dynamics?
Give women more power,
Yeah.
because they don't have any, and they just need a little bit more. Just a little bit more.
Right. Well, they have this idea that in a society where tradition has held that women have certain roles and men have certain roles, and maybe men's roles involve more labor outside the home and women's roles involve more labor inside the home, that women are forced into their role but men are not forced into their role. Right? And that men's role isn't restrictive or oppressive in any way, but women's role is. So then they treat it as a situation where the man who is doing more labor outside the home is forcing the woman to stay home and do more labor inside the home and raise the children and get all the kudos for being the good parent. It's his fault that she has to suffer those indignities. So, what do? In addition to engaging with men and boys, We also work with women, girls, socially marginalized groups, service providers, community health workers, community and religious leaders, and other stakeholders to address and prevent gender-based violence. So stakeholders is another weasel word, right? They use the term stakeholders to imply that your neighbors, your community members that are not part of your household, have some sort of investment in your household that gives them a right to some level of control over what happens in your household, how you live, how you raise your children, how you and your partner interact with each other, and so on. So, how many of you all want your neighbors telling you what TV programs that you should allow your kids to watch?
Oh, hell no.
Right?
I don't know any of my neighbors, and I don't want.
What about your neighbors telling you what language you may or may not use in front of your children? And by that I mean not just cussing. Right? Oh, you can't speak English in front of your children. That's racist. Right? Maybe your children have an ethnic background that is not, white Anglo-Saxon. You have to speak their historical native language in front of them.
Yeah, I'm sat here in the UK thinking, wait, has that not already happened?
Yeah,
because it's happened here.
there are neighborhoods in the U.S. that are primarily Spanish speaking neighborhoods, and there is a tendency among illegal immigrants to want to preserve that language barrier, even though it handicaps the children in terms of their ability to integrate and have successful economic endeavors in the country where they live, right? Derek Workman says Quebec and French. Yep, similar issue, right? Oh, we're losing our culture if we assimilate. Well, the history of the United States is one of combined cultural preservation and cultural assimilation. So, for instance, your family may have a history of celebrating holidays with certain types of food that go back to your family's countries of origin. And there may be a lot of terminology that your family uses in the home and with each other that, again, goes back to your family's country of origin. But at the same time, you speak English using the vernacular of the local area of America where you live, or Canada where you live, or any European country where it's spoken where you live, and you enjoy other things about the local culture that are not part of your national origin. And the nice thing about living in a country like America is that you probably have terminology that's part of your everyday speech that comes from a variety of other languages, and you just spit it out like it's completely natural and normal and was always there. But if you went back to your roots, the far back roots, those words didn't exist in your language, where your language came from. And in fact, a lot of English-speaking Americans, their national origin is from countries that were white countries, but the language wasn't English. It was something like Gaelic or German or Italian, French, right? And nobody gets upset when people whose ancestors came from Germany speak English. Nobody gets upset when people whose ancestors came from Ireland speak English. as long as they don't sound like they came from Ireland too much for people who speak English around them to understand anything they're saying. Like some of the accents can get pretty thick and nobody has any idea what you're saying. But yeah, nobody gets upset about that, right? People only get upset when people whose ancestors came from Saudi Arabia speak English, or people whose ancestors came from Venezuela speak English, or Brazil, right? Or Mexico. So it's
as tempting though it is to say the whole world should speak English. I would say that because I'm English. I love language. I wish I could speak every language, because there are some sentiments that can only be expressed in certain languages, and they just
like
don't
cavelling.
translate to other languages. And I don't want any language to go extinct, because every language is beautiful in its own way, and it has its own. Every language has its own way of expressing things with a certain beauty that is not expressible in any other language. But if a country develops with a certain language, then it ought to be maintained. And the USA, and indeed Canada, which we'll go ahead and call North America for the sake of argument, the idea that they have a common language is important. And I'm going to get biblical now, in terms of the Tower of Babel, or is it Babel, whatever it is. The Tower of Babel is an important lesson for us to learn, that diversity is not our strength, especially not when it comes to language. If we all have a common language, then we're all able to communicate with each other, which is a good thing. I mean, yeah, it's good if we can all have a reference point to another language. People should learn more than one language. It's easy for me to say because I'm English and I don't know any other language, and I don't need to, because it's the most common language in the world. But just like it's important to have a nation where you a geographical region in which we all have common values, it's difficult to have common values if you don't have a common language. And this is why every nation in the world has a common language, so that they can communicate with each other without anything getting lost in translation. And so it's important that other nations do have their own language. I don't want to erase Spanish or French or Arabic or Chinese Mandarin. It's fine if you all have your own languages, but if a country is built on one particular language, then it's in the interests of that country to have that common language.
Yeah. Yep. And
like if half of you are speaking Spanish and half of you are speaking English, then that's obviously going to create a divide that's not necessary, and is even detrimental. And sorry, but the USA is an English-speaking country. It was devised as an English-speaking country. The Constitution was written in English, and I'm not saying Mexico has to speak English. I'm not saying China has to speak English. I'm not saying anything in South America or any these other countries have to speak English. But it's weird with the USA, because it was always supposed to be sort of a melting pot of various cultures and various languages. But English has been the established language of it for a while, and if you want to communicate with each other, then it's important that you have a common language. Like, if you don't have a common language, then you don't have a common culture. And if you don't have a common language, then your country's going to break apart.
yeah.
Like necessarily, not just because you don't speak the same language, but because you don't have the same reference points. You don't have the same you don't have the same common understanding of how anything works. Everything starts with language. If you don't understand each other, then the Tower of Babel is going to happen. It's going to get broken apart into these various things, and then fucking China's going to invade you and make you all speak Mandarin.
Which would be very challenging. Very difficult to go back and forth between English and Asian languages. There's no similarity in our structure at all.
And this is happening in England itself, which you would think would be the one country in the world where they would persist with the English language. But no, we're already being forced to put multiple languages on our road signs, including fucking Arabic or Urdu or any of these things. And it's like I say, it's you can benefit from talking multiple languages because you can understand those multiple references and the multiple beauties of multiple languages. But for the most part, we need to be able to communicate with each other. If we can't, then we're going to get exploded apart, and at that point, we're susceptible to being invaded by people who do have cohesion and unity. Diversity is not our strength, folks. I know we've heard this from every angle, but it's not. Diversity is an interesting hobby to have. Like speaking multiple languages is an interesting hobby to have. And I'm absolutely on board with it because I love language. But
and it doesn't just have to be a hobby either. I mean, translators, the median annual salary for translators is about $57,000, which is pretty respectable. The top 10% can earn over $97,000, and it depends on what language you learned and how in demand translators are for that language, and so on. But I mean, it is about supply and demand, right? But and how good you are as well. And obviously there are a lot of factors that will affect whether you get hired and so on. But being able to speak multiple languages creates job openings for you that other people can't compete with you if they don't have that same skill. Just like if you know how to fix cars, you have job openings in fixing cars that somebody who doesn't know how to fix cars can't really do, can't really take. And you also have an easier time if you decide that you're going to travel internationally. So one thing that I noticed when I've gone to various men's issues events is that people from parts of Europe where there's a lot of countries that are smaller countries that have borders that are easier to cross between several small countries, they have a tendency to they have a very solid grasp on like their childhood native language, but they also might know 4 or 5 other languages well enough to converse casually in those languages without being confused by things that other people say or saying things that confuse other people. They'll know slang, they'll know everything, and it's just fairly common. In fact, I met one fellow when I was at ICMI in the UK, and I can't remember whether it was 2016 or 2018, but he spoke 10 languages. 10.
Jesus.
And I was like, how do you know so many languages? Well, I travel a lot, he said. I go to all these different countries. And these languages are languages that are the most commonly spoken languages in at least some of the countries that I go to. So I've learned them through interaction with other people, and because I needed to in order to be able to interact with other people. And, there are some areas of Europe where most people speak at least 2 languages, and often upwards of 4. And then there are other areas, like the United States is sort of a language desert in that
Yeah.
people end up isolated by language. And it's not just isolated by language barriers between English and Spanish or English and French or English and German and stuff like that. It's English and English, right? English that is spoken in Ohio versus English that is spoken in some southern state. And it's not just oil versus all versus Earl, which are all ways to say oil, and or the
Put an R in your tires.
Not knowing throng your iron machine, right? You got to put ire in your tars. None of that is as bad as when somebody comes along with a bunch of jargon or slang, and you don't understand.
Talking about, you feel me? I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you have that end of it, and then you have somebody comes along and gives you instructions on how to do something, and 2/3 of the words that they're using don't make any sense to you at all, or they throw a bunch of acronyms at you and you have no idea what they mean. And one of the things that I had to do in my extended study in trying to, there's a program you can go through with the Department of Developmental Disabilities, that you finish a set of studies, you get an extra little bit in your paycheck for having this expertise, and it involves watching a lot of videos and taking a bunch of tests, and it's all things that you learn how to do these things, or you learn this information, and it's supposed to improve your ability to do your job. So on this site they have it ranges from how do you do laundry to a lot more manager level type stuff, which I'm not a manager, so I don't have to learn that stuff, but I accidentally got into that area, and one of the lessons was on jargon as a barrier to communication. And you think, well, jargon is it exists to describe things in a way that people with the same profession understand it. So, for instance, we talk about intimate partner and sexual violence. All right, we know what that means, and if we say IPNSV, we know that refers to intimate partner and sexual violence, and it's fairly descriptive, right? It gives you an idea immediately what that means, but to a person who has no idea of these issues, it might sound like gobbledygook. Like, no, what the hell is intimate partner and sexual violence, right? When we talk about male and female circumcision, and we use the phrase genital mutilation, right? People are more familiar with the use of the term genital mutilation to describe female circumcision, but when you use it to describe male circumcision, there's a lot of people that have never heard that and don't know what you're talking about. And so there is a tendency for jargon to sometimes get in the way of communication, and that you start talking about that, suddenly your audience is a little bit lost. Suddenly your audience maybe doesn't understand what the heck are you talking about? What did you just say there? And it's the same thing happens in my profession, right? If I ask for my coworkers, to tell where's the MAR, it's not where it's supposed to be. Does somebody have the MAR? They know exactly what I'm asking for. Most of you who don't work in medicine have no idea what I just said I was asking for. And if I actually said the medical administration record, it doesn't give you that much more information. I would have to sit down and say, okay, there's a book, like it's in a binder in my whatever house I'm working in at the time, that has sheets of paper with medicine lists and a calendar that I can mark off each day at the time of day that I give them the specific medication. I gave this medication at 7 a.m. Here's my initials. And it has all the information about these medications, and then the next person that comes in can see that the 7 medications were given. That's the medical administration record. It is a record of administering medications and who did it, when they did it, and whether or not the result was successful. So at the back of the page allows you to write something if it wasn't. Gave the client the medicines, the client immediately threw up. That's something that you have to take note of, because obviously then the client didn't absorb that dose of medication and did not get the effects of the medication, right? That's all stuff the coworker immediately understands when you say, hey, where's the MAR? It's not in its proper place. Does somebody have it? But if I just said that in the room with somebody who didn't work there, they might have no idea what I'm talking about, right? So language can be a barrier even when you're speaking English to somebody who speaks English. If you are using terminology that isn't familiar to them, even if it's English terminology. And it's even worse if there's a lot of my neighbors that I don't speak the same language they speak. I don't know anything they say, and they don't know anything I say. And we all have this habit of speaking louder to try to get people to understand, and using a lot of hand gestures and crap, right? It would be better if we all had in elementary school lessons where we got to be bilingual, and there was a primary language used here, which historically it has been English, and there's not any reason for that to change. But learning a new language doesn't mean that you forget your old language. Increasing the details of your culture doesn't mean that you forget the details that you had before. You don't stop having a Christmas tree just because you learn some traditions involved in, say, Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or any other solstice, celebrating the winter solstice. Oh, we're celebrating Yule. But in fact, you might learn some things about the Christmas tree if you started celebrating Yule. But in any case, you don't have to give up your old culture. You just simply become more cosmopolitan as you learn more things about the world around you, and you get to enjoy a broader spectrum of things. What bothers me about this whole discussion of people coming in and telling you how you should live your life and everything is and like I said, stakeholders, the whole stakeholders discussion, right? So what if the government came along and said, well, you have more Spanish neighbors than you do neighbors who speak English, more Spanish-speaking neighbors. So you are now obligated to take a course in Spanish, right? That would be very difficult for me right now, especially right this minute, because I don't have time off from work to go take that language course, and I would probably have to pay for it, right? If the government came along and said that to me, because I'm not a minority, it would be at my expense. It would be an unfunded mandate. And so this stakeholder idea, when they come along in a foreign nation and they label everybody in the greater community stakeholders in your family, in your household, in your life, in your choices, what they are essentially doing is communizing your life and your life choices, right? No, you don't get to decide what the rules are in your household, because we have decided that the culture that you live in is sexist. Your traditions are bad. And instead of becoming more cosmopolitan and increasing the scope of traditions that you are aware of and can decide to make a part of your life, you have to give up your traditions and adopt these new traditions. And I think that's a completely different story than expecting that people who move to a nation that they were not part of before increase the scope of their culture instead of keeping it encapsulated. So they consider this a holistic approach. Holistic. When you look at words like, this is another piece of jargon, right? Holistic. And everybody talks about this term. They use this term like it means wholesome. All right, so let's take a look at the actual definition. Holistic means characterized by the belief that the parts of something are interconnected and can be explained only by reference to the whole. Characterized by treatment of the whole person or taking into account mental and social factors rather than just the symptoms of an illness. And let's see if I can... Yeah, we're getting into... There is a holistic approach. A holistic approach is a way of thinking that considers the whole of something rather than just the parts. It can be used in health, business, and other areas. So this is all fairly accurate as far as I'm used to seeing it described, right? So
it can be taken all kinds of good ways and all kinds of bad ways.
Yeah. When you see somebody that says they practice holistic medicine, a lot of times it's this idea that to treat an illness, you subject an individual, or to treat a illness that's caused by some sort of toxin or poison, you subject the individual to a very tiny amount of that in a solution, and it trains the body. Well, it works with allergies. There's a thing called allergy shots that you can get, allergy injections that involve injecting the body with minute amounts of allergens and a substance called immunoglobulin. And it basically trains the immune system to quit freaking the fuck out every time harmless things come up to it and say hi, like pollen, so that it can address, pneumonia when pneumonia comes to town. But it doesn't necessarily work with everything. So, by the way, vaccination works as is holistic medicine. Most people who promote vaccines will tell you holistic medicine doesn't work, but vaccines are literally holistic medicine. So there you go. But let's see, where were we? This page. So this holistic approach, what they're saying here is, you look at a domestic violence situation in a household, right? And you have Jane Doe and Richard Roe get married, so now she's Jane Roe, and Jane and Richard Roe have fights all the time, and they maybe, swat at each other and stuff. Uh-oh, I knocked Lauren out. Is that
yeah, she's gone.
Badger violence?
You might need to mute her. Lauren, you started snoring.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Snoring? I was not snoring.
It was definitely a snoring noise.
It was so cute. It's not fair. When I snore, I sound like a pack of angry Dobermans about to strike, man. Like, like really, really. But yeah, when I'm having allergy troubles and I know I'm gonna snore, I sleep on the couch so my poor husband can sleep. But no, this holistic approach, they say, let's Jane and Richard Roe swat on each other. Maybe it's not severe, like, frying pan level or anybody pouring boiling water on each other or anything like that, but just similar to what they might portray on TV, people pushing each other around and shoving while they're yelling over, you spent money on something we couldn't afford, or some shit like that, right? Instead of considering, well, she gets drunk and or he spends too much money on model cars, and he's got a model car habit, and it's almost at the addictive level, and so they can't afford groceries because he's bought this model car, right? So that problem is part of the issue that leads to this domestic violence. Like, there's a flaw in behavior that is frustrating one of the partners, and the other partner gets defensive, and suddenly, there's this explosion, and then between the two of them, they have conflict management issues, so they don't know how to approach this conflict in a different way, right? That's basically the underlying problems most of the time with domestic violence, is that there's some conflict occurring over some dysfunctional behavior, and the partners don't have their own personal framework for handling that conflict in a more effective and functional way, so they fight, right? And instead of that, come along and this holistic approach, well, we're going to look at the greater community, we're going to look at social norms, we're going to look at this idea of patriarchal oppression. Maybe we won't talk about Jane's drinking problem because you can't say that she has a flaw. Maybe you won't talk about his car problem because cars are important to them in some way or another, right? Or, at the other end of it, maybe she's bitching about something that isn't a problem. He comes home from work and wants to play a little bit of video. It's like, all right, go ahead. Enjoy sitting back and relaxing. I'm going to watch and see how you do this game, right? No, she's going to yell and scream and have a fit because he's enjoying himself and she's not enjoying herself. That's, again, a problem. But instead of dealing with, hey, maybe you also need a hobby, or maybe you can talk it out and come up with an agreement about together time and video game time and her hobby time and so on. No, video games are bad and he's selfish for playing, so he has to stop. Right? That's basically, when they say holistic approach, they're not actually talking about examining the full causes behind the problem in a unbiased and functional manner. They're talking about how do we blame men? How do we promote patriarchy theory? What details do we have to include or make up in order to make this a male-perpetrated issue? And as a result, they go for this thing, meaningful male engagement using our gender transformative approaches and do not harm framework. Let's see. So, they have this training that they've made available, and I don't know if I saw it later down on this page, but I clicked on and opened one of their links here on the page. And came across this. I'm going to duplicate this tab so I can go back to the top and show you the actual title. This is the kind of stuff they're doing here. This is how how do they handle this? They're not necessarily going into, say, your house and talking to you. They're doing community activities.
Like walk a mile in her heels or some dumb shit?
Kind of. And it's a bit different. I'm going to close some tabs here. So we're going to close this. Yeah. So this one is called Gender, Youth, and Social Inclusion Staff Training Manual. This is their staff training manual. So they'll have maybe a center set up where they get people to come into the center and take courses in the center, and they do these activities in these courses. So it's kind of like a curriculum for an elementary school classroom, right? And these activities, as let's see, the pages are taking their time loading. They have, their vision is a gender equal world where all people share their sexual and reproductive health and rights. They say. What they really mean is women. And they're high quality gender equitable programs. Gender equitable, again, meaning they claim that women are discriminated against or oppressed, and they want to undo the conditions that they claim cause that. So they have this training. As we continue to advance our work, we recognize the critical importance of continually improving how we work and understanding that people we work with face multiple vulnerabilities. The manual is intended to help EngenderHealth teams, partner organizations, and other stakeholders in EngenderHealth program countries strengthen their capacity in GYSI. So these are when they train these people, they're taking people from the country of origin, which is the United States, and people who are already part of feminist organizations in the country that's targeted, and then also community members that they want to absorb into these organizations and get them to act as carriers of the dogma for these organizations out into the community to infect the rest of the community with it. And this basically is essentially how they alter the way that you think in order to make that happen. So they facilitate the teams to reflect on, challenge, and change their own personal GYSI-related biases, beliefs, prejudices, and stereotypes. So remember, GYSI is gender, youth, and social inclusion. Right, and they have this whole set of different tools that they're using. So I started looking at the tools. Power walk being the first one, right? And they have this activity that they do that takes about 45 minutes. Right? You're in a room with people. You basically print a list and you cut it into strips, and each person gets a strip. And then you have a role play. And so they have these strips basically are characters. And they have these different details about these characters, right? And it's interesting to look at the details that they give people. Like, woman, age 25, 3 children, wants to use contraception, but her husband is opposed. Girls, age 16, pregnant as a result of rape. Woman, age 21, lives with a disability and cannot move outside her house without support. Right? Woman, 40, influential teacher and wife of community leader. So she's the first woman who's not a victim of something. Right? Woman in age 35, married with 4 children. Husband does not allow her to go outside without his permission and does not want her to use contraception. Again, victim. Woman, age 35, successful entrepreneur, abused by her husband. Victim. Right? Then we look at how they portray men. So, again, this is where the sneakiness comes in. Right? All of this stuff sounds innocuous to most people. All this, well, where's the feminism? Where's the bias? Man, age 40, police officer and a friend of the president. Right? We have one victim here. Boy, 15, orphaned, works at a restaurant where he's sexually abused. Right? But, let's see. Man, age 45, teacher at local school with strong religious beliefs. Man, age 35, religious leader. Where's the victimhood here? Man, age 50, rich local administrator with strong religious beliefs. Right? We have one woman again who's got some power. A little bit. Right? Woman age 40, government minister. Girl age 16 does not want to marry yet, but her parents are forcing her to marry. Transgender adolescent age 17, unemployed and sexually abused and bullied. Right? So it seems like the men can't be victims, but the boys can. Boy age 17, living with HIV, but scared to tell anyone, living, begging on the street, beaten and sexually abused. But again, we have woman 20, unmarried and pregnant, unable to visit a health facility due to the fear of stigma. Woman age 40, widowed, living with HIV, abandoned by her family. Right? And the men... Oh, community leader. Recently won an election by distributing food to the poor. Powerful. Community leader and brother of a government minister. Right next to woman, age 30, sex worker living with HIV. So we have all these, most of the males, unless they're children, unless they're underage, most of the males are in positions of power, right? The first thing they've done here is imply that men aren't vulnerable. Men cannot also be victims of anything. Or if they are, it's rare. Whereas almost all of the women are portrayed as victims of something. So they have all these characters, and this continues, like there's this whole list, and then they have the exercise. Explain what you're doing. You're going to share these strips of paper with the characteristics. So each person gets a strip of paper, and they're supposed to role play that character. So they're supposed to imagine themselves in that circumstance. And then once you've distributed them, then you take them through this series of questions, right? And it's stuff like, I can visit a hospital alone any time of the day and night. I can visit a hospital alone even if it is far from my house. I do not need anyone's permission to visit a health center. I can decide when and at what age I want to get married. I can choose my life partner on my own. I can decide whether I want to become pregnant or conceive with my partner. I can decide when I want to have children. I can decide the timing and spacing between my children. I can exercise my right to consent to sex. And these are all questions that are being asked or statements that are being made. You're supposed to consider as part of these character ideas, would this be true or false for this person? So if you take a room full of people and you only give them male characters that have power and authority, and none that have vulnerability or victimhood, and you only give them female characters, for the most part, that have vulnerability and victimhood, and few, if any, that have power and authority, how do you think that their outlook on these questions is going to end up?
This is why the whole world hates us. But it's not because our governments are imposing capitalism on the world. It's not because our governments are imposing democracy. It's because our governments are imposing feminism on the world. I know we've been, and I say our governments instead of us. I'm very careful to separate these pronouns. It's not we. It's not us. It's the governments that have taken control of our countries as they try to impose certain values on the rest of them, such as democracy and such as feminism. It's the whole world hates us because they think we, the populations, are responsible for what our governments are doing, which is imposing feminism on them. you all have to treat your women better than you treat your men, and the rest of the world is going, the fuck are you talking about? That's not how anything works, dickheads. But we don't listen to this. We just hear them saying this and go, well, you're not being progressive and not being politically correct enough. And we don't see this because our governments are in charge of. Governments are determined to impose these things like democracy and feminism, and the rest of the world is like, no, we've got by for fucking thousands of years without this nonsense. Like, we don't think women are better than men. We don't think men are better than women. We've found this. We've found a balance that's worked for us for fucking hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I know you think women are better than men, but we can't. We don't share this worldview, and this is what the West doesn't get. The oikophobes among us like to blame everything on colonialism, but the ideology with which Western governments have been imposing across the world is this idea that women need to be protected, and men need to do the protecting. And most of the world's going, yeah, we know that, we already have that, but you guys are doing it to the nth degree. Like, this isn't progressive. This is actually, dare I say, traditionalism pushed to the nth degree in the backward direction. Like, this isn't progressive, the idea that men need to protect women. This is like, every civilization across the world has long since had this idea that men need to protect women. We know this. We've always had this idea, and we've always had our own interpretation of this idea. But you motherfuckers in the West have just taken this instinctive drive to protect women to the nth degree. And like, this is why we hate you. It's not, again, it's not because of a spice trade from thousands of years ago. It's not because of colonialism. In a way, it is because of colonialism. But
yeah,
the colonial,
this is colonialism.
The colonial ideology,
colonialism.
The colonial ideology that you've been trying to spread on us for the last couple of 100 years is that women are better than men, and we don't believe this. And it's up to us here at Honey Badger Radio, a few other isolated organizations that are here going, no, sorry, no, we don't want to spread feminism to the rest of the world. It's just our governments that are doing this.
Yep.
And it's so difficult to get this across to people because our populations are associated with our governments, and like, we're here going, no, governments do not represent us. Our governments have been taken over by rabid fucking leftists and men to bow down to women even more than they already do by their very nature. And it's not, I don't want to act like chivalry is a normal thing for any nation to do, but it's been centuries. Like, it's not. We like to think it's just been decades. It was only in the past couple of decades that we've been subjugated by these feminist ideals, but it's been centuries.
Yeah, the
chivalry,
from real chivalry to romantic chivalry happened in like the 13th century. 13th.
Any kind of chivalry has just been a hypernaturalized version of how any civilization is supposed to work.
Well,
And again,
real chivalry was basically just horsemanship. You have a horse, you have the equivalent.
That's literally what
in the
that's
time
what
period.
cheval means.
Yeah, it's
Cheval is the French word for horse.
yeah. And at the time that the concept of chivalry was created, having a horse was almost like having your own tank. Right? Especially if you had a horse and a suit of armor and a sword. You were essentially a tank with your horse. And so you had the capacity to be not just the biggest asshole in your neighborhood, but the most effective asshole in your neighborhood. And therefore, this concept of not abusing your power as the person with the tank, that essentially is what chivalry was about. And French aristocracy, women of the French aristocracy in and I can't remember, it was 13th or 14th century. If you look at Peter Wright's website, gynocentrism.com, he actually has this history documented there. Kind of came up with these ideas of co-opting the concepts of chivalry that applied basically to owners of horses and swords and suits of armor who were landowners and had power over other people and so on, to, well, this is the relationship between men and women. Men are the lords and women are the serfs, which was not true. It was bullshit. But they managed to convince men to take a subservient role to women in terms of emotional service and such, and personal sacrifice and so on, by sort of co-opting, really, essentially co-opting all of the principles of the working principles of actual chivalry to this notion of gender or sexual debt and sexual power and so on. Very much in the same way that women, as in feminism, co-opted the victim narrative of class inequality for feminism's Marxist ideas, like feminism's communist ideas, and seizing the means of reproduction and so on, and treating the ability to work and the ability to essentially be at large in the world as a commodity that men keep from women. So go to, if you want to understand more about the history of the twisting of chivalry into service to women, from basically service to your community into service to women, go to gynocentrism.com and look into the history. There's quite a bit of reading you can do on that site. It's really a good site to understand the social dynamics and how they evolved and how unnatural all of this is, because when we talk about gynocentrism, we are not talking about the traditional family ideal of a hierarchy of protectiveness between outside threats and the children. We're talking about the unnatural treatment of women as if they're more important than everybody else in the world. And women's interests are somehow more important than everybody else's. So, again, that was gynocentrism.com. But I think we're going to stop at this point, because I've got more of a time limit tonight than I usually do. So we may look some more into this paper, we may not. The main thing I wanted to show you guys was sort of the little ways they sneak this gender bias into these programs and implement them in the world. But in any case, I'm going to read we have a super chat, but I don't think we have a super chow or a rumble rant of any kind that is paid. So the super chat we got was from Sierra de Flora, who gave us $4 and said, "Pair character exaggeratingly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee." And I'm grateful for any cup of coffee, so thank you very much, Sierra de Flora.
His arms outstretched.
Yes. Very, very outstretched, apparently. And then I will also, because I didn't give the spiel at the beginning of the show, I will say you've been listening to HBR Talk 343, What's Wrong with Feminist Foreign Aid. I've been your host, Hannah Wallen, and I've been here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And we have been looking into the darkest, stinkiest of feminist rabbit holes for the last few weeks. And we'll probably continue this again next week. And as always, when we get into this stuff, we are getting into stuff that gets us in trouble with feminists and the areas that they control, which includes of the internet. As we dish out our smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, we've discovered that both historically and recently, the provoked thoughts are always fighting back. They made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, which is the most stable way to help us out. Feedthebadger.com allows you to support our work without having to support censorship by other platforms that offer third-party payment. And if you want to tip us directly, instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar, because you know that they're going to dip into the tip, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on our website, honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So that's two ways to get to our support. And I would like to thank everybody for listening. Thanks to my two co-hosts for going through. This was kind of another weird, convoluted one. A lot of times with feminism, there's this nice little gilded facade over the pile of shit, but we found the pile of shit underneath it.
I'm glad we're not talking about the Biden cartel. It's less depressing.
Yeah, well, at least the one thing you can say for the Biden cartel, their facade wasn't gilded and it wasn't very thick. The facade here is pretty thick, unfortunately. So we end up having to do a lot of digging and a lot of explaining for a small amount of detail, so that people do understand that we're not making just making this shit up. And I want to remind everybody, like, for the last probably 12, 14 years that various ones of us have been talking about this, and the greater men's rights movement has been talking about this for decades, by the way. And we've been saying that this stuff exists, that this funding exists, and that these programs exist, and this stuff is happening. And we've been gaslighted by feminists over this for years and years. Oh, no, you're full of shit. That's a conspiracy theory. Take your tinfoil hat off. What the heck's wrong with you? Here's the receipts. We are showing the receipts right here. But again, thanks for listening to us go over the receipts. And thanks to my two co-hosts for going over it. The receipts are dry, right? But thanks for going over them with me. Thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. Good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.